All right, let's get this started. Hello and welcome everyone to this panel discussion by SIA Partners. This session is about the importance of data literacy for leaders, as translating data into decision making and people analytics is crucial in every sector of the business world. So, what is data literacy? Data literacy is the ability to use and understand data to derive valuable insights and build strategies from the information gathered. In a data-driven organization, data literacy is a methodology for answering organizational questions where everyone is equipped to do so with data. We know the organizations across all industries have recognized the need for digital transformation to compete in the current economy. So the underutilization of data science and business analytics dooms digital transformation initiatives. To improve the digital services and processes, you must have insights into the data they generate. The success of your digital transformation pivots on having the appropriate data skills across the organization. I am Kavya Mohan, and I'm a data engineering senior consultant with SIA Partners. My work has mostly been with financial companies in the field of data transformation, data analysis, and reporting. I am the moderator for our panel discussion for today on the topic data literacy for leaders, translating data into decision-making and people analytics. So let me start off by giving you a brief summary on SIA Partners. SIA Partners is a next-generation consulting firm focused on delivering superior value to our clients. Our global footprint and expertise in more than 30 sectors and services allow us to enhance our clients' businesses worldwide. As a pioneer of Consulting 4.0, we integrate AI into our solutions. Our team brings together more than 300 data scientists, data engineers, web developers, and UI and UX designers across our 5 research and development centers in Europe and North America. We are actively recruiting talented data science enthusiasts to expand our reach. Please check our booth outside to know more details. Our Women and Allies and DEIB network actively work towards the improvement and inclusion of women in our workforce. Let's hear the experiences and thoughts of women leaders from SIA Partners. I'm excited to introduce our wonderful panelists for today. We have Marci Marra, who is the one and only woman partner in SIA Partners leadership team in the US. Marci is considered a specialist in organizational health and effectiveness. She is a committed leader with a passion for inspiring people to innovate and make impactful changes. Joining us on the stage is Zoya Ashirov, who is an associate partner at SIA Partners, and she specializes in financial crimes, risk, and regulatory compliance. She also leads our DEIB efforts in the North America. The panel includes Lipsa, who is a managing director at SIA Partners and leads the insurance practices. She advises clients on technology transformation with a focus on data and digital. We also have Ambrosio, who is a senior manager at SIA Partners and is focused on business transformation. She is also a co-leader of SIA's DEIB Impact Task Force and is a part of SIA Cares Metrics Committee. And we have Liz Sykes on the stage, who is also a senior manager and who has deep expertise in program and project management across complex business initiatives within the finance and technology industry. She has also actively been involved in the DEIB Council, where she currently serves as co-lead of the Impact Task Force. A hearty welcome to all the panelists. Thank you for being here today. So with that, we can start our discussion for today. So I would like to start with Marci. So given your background in the domain of organizational health and effectiveness, What does data literacy mean to you, and why is it important?
Thank you. Thank you for the warm welcome. I'm excited to be here today. Data literacy is a really interesting topic when you start to think about culture. Culture, organizations, often people think that there's no data behind it. You think about culture transformation, and there's this misconception about it being really hard to measure. It's just something you feel. You innately know if a culture is good or bad. And there may be some truth to actually intuition about culture being good or bad, but there's really a lot of data behind it. There's a huge amount of science that goes into it. There's the really low-hanging fruit, the easy stuff to grab, right? Data around like attrition, absenteeism, employee surveys. Those are things everyone should be able to look at. And you'd actually be surprised how many clients come and say, we need to change our culture, or we need to change our DEIB structure. We need to be more diverse, but there's no metrics around it. So we start with that. Then you can move into things that are a little bit more challenging. You start to look at things like sentiment analysis. And that's really, what are your employees saying on social media? Places like Glassdoor, LinkedIn, Fishbowl, and there's so many others. At SIA Partners, we've developed some tools where we can go out and grab that. So you might be surprised the data that we can go out and harvest off of public domain and come back and say, here's really what your employees think about this. So here's some data. This is really what your culture looks like from the employee's perspective. And we can start shaping things from there. And this is so important because it really takes that art of culture to art and science. And it's really something that at SIA Partners, we spend a lot of time figuring out, how can we harvest that? What can we do with that data? How can we continue to mature the data and to be able to tell rich stories? And I work with leaders in all kinds of organizations to really look at that data and really start to educate them on the power of the data that they have before they go and make drastic plans to change their organization, to reorg, to hire or fire, any of those decisions. So they're all made data-driven.
Yeah, that was really insightful. Thank you, Marci. So Amanda, in the domain of business transformation, what does data literacy mean to you, and why is it important?
Well, thank you so much, Kavya and Marci, for a great answer. I want to pivot a little bit to the business side where, I have teams that we focus in on uncovering insights, making data-driven decisions. And there's been so many times we've looked at data and realized some unknown things that we had no idea that was going to be the case, or we made assumptions about something and we look at the data and we're like, oh my gosh, wow, that was really insightful, and it really helps our client make better decisions. So really focusing in on that data-driven decision making, it helps eliminate the bias, helps eliminate the assumptions or emotion in decision making. It's so important and rewarding to be able to uncover those insights. And it's just an invaluable leadership skill. But on the flip side, I think you also have to be aware that it could also mean that things can go awry. So you could have poor data integrity, lack of context, or biases that creep into your data. So you need to be focusing on making sure that your data is very, really good, solid data that you're making decisions on. And then there's one other aspect that I wanted to bring up, which happens to be protecting your data and making sure that you're collecting the right kinds of data and not collecting data that you don't really need. Because GDPR has come onto our landscape in data privacy, and so GDPR is the Greater Data Privacy Regulations out of Europe, and it's really the landmark legislation for data privacy and has large impacts across all areas of businesses, everything from being understanding, what data that you can share with partners, or even in if you're using vendors. It has all sorts of implications from PII, like personal information that a company collects. So there's just a lot of things that we now have to consider when we're collecting data. So understanding data literacy is understanding all these aspects: the good, the bad, the data privacy, all of it. So thank you.
Those were some great examples, Amanda. Thank you. My question would be for Liz. So coming to you, Liz, what are your thoughts about the importance of data literacy and financial services in the financial services industry?
Yeah, thanks, Kavya. Honestly, when Kavya was like, do you want to be on a panel about data literacy? I was like, I am not a data scientist. I'm not a data engineer. I'm program project management and finance and technology. But really the insights from data drive those decisions that the executives that we work with on a day-to-day basis are making. And consulting is a lot about storytelling. So what's the story that the data is telling you? And the way that I've leveraged data and understanding where it's derived from, what's the story that it tells about where the client started, where they're trying to go. And oftentimes leaders have ideas about where they want to take the company from a strategic perspective, from a personnel perspective, like Marci was saying, and it takes a step back looking into the data. What is it telling us? Where have we been? Where are the metrics that we're looking to hit? Are those the right metrics that we're looking at? Did we collect the right information? And so understanding data, large volumes of data, how it's processed, how we're sifting through it and making sense of it, and the story that it's telling and that we want it to tell, quite frankly, is super important from a data perspective. So really having that deep understanding and be able to derive those insights from the data sets that you're looking at, being able to go out and ask really thoughtful questions like, what did we miss here? What do we need more of? What is this really telling us? Did we look at the data in the right way? Do we need to pivot various variables or fields to get to where we're going? And so that's where data comes into play in a lot of the projects that I'm working on in the program project management space, whether it be with the finance executives or the HR executives. It all comes from those insights derived from the data and the story that we're looking to tell.
Yep, that is totally true. Data surely tells a story, and I feel it's very important to analyze the past data to make a better future in every aspect. Thank you, Liz. So moving on to Zoya and Lipsa. So Zoya, in the industry of financial crimes and compliance, where do you see data literacy bringing the most value?
Thank you so much, Kavya. So just like Liz, I'm not a data scientist. So by training, I grew up on Wall Street. So most of my 18 years I spent in the financial services industry, and 12 years of that I was policing broker dealers on Wall Street. You know, so the Wolf of Wall Streets of the world basically was my life for about 12 years. And so really exciting, actually, to tell you the truth. It was pretty fun. But so how did we do that? How did we get our work done, right? Data, right? So in order to be able to find instances of abuse, sales practice abuses, or insider trading, or any other type of wrongdoings in the financial services industry, you really have to rely on data, the data that you take in. And you need to understand how to read that data. What is the data telling you? It's the story, right? And so in order for you to be able to then eventually prosecute and hold people accountable for the lying and the cheating and the stealing, money from 90-year-old blind ladies, true story, been there. You need to, it's sad, but it's a fact, right? So you need to be able to understand what the data is telling you, the story that the data is telling you. And so as a regulator, we used to take in a lot of data. So I'm not sure if you guys are familiar, but there are systems and programs out there that FINRA, the regulator, uses. It's called CAT and TRACE, where a lot of the trading, the transactional data that comes out of Wall Street day to day, all of your 401ks, your buys and sells of your stocks, that is all going to regulators on a day-to-day basis. Millions and millions line items of data that go into regulators. So what do you do with it? If you don't know how to read it, you don't know what it's telling you. And then you don't know how to go after the people that are lying and cheating potentially and stealing. So in the financial services industry, now that I'm on the private side, I help banks understand what the regulators are looking for, right? So as a bank, if you don't know what the data internally is telling you, you're not seeing the risks that could potentially be popping up. What are your reps doing? What is the data telling you? So as leaders, it is really important to know how to read it and understand it so you could identify the risks the hidden dangers within your organization that you might not be understanding because you're up here. So you're trusting the people below you to kind of give you the information. You really need to take an extra effort to make sure you understand how to read the data, how to interpret it, analyze it, and make your own decisions and make your own conclusions.
Yep, that was great. Thank you, Zoya. So Lipsa, what about in the industry of insurance practices?
Oh my, I can go on and on about it. So insurance industry thinks, what do we do with data? We're an insurance company. And they kind of lag behind, banks and other financial services in terms of how much data they collect and what to do with the data, right? And insurance industry is one place where across the value chain, right, from pricing a product to selling a policy to settling a claim, data is key to every step. Just to give you an example, when you're looking to buy an insurance policy for your car, whether it's Geico or Progressive, a couple of dollars difference makes a big difference when making a decision on which one you want to go with, right? So being able to price a product competitively, you need data. To be able to process a claim, you need data. There are data leakages, there's fraud in data. All of this data collection helps you identify and prevent frauds. A lot of examples that Zoya brought up. It's also applicable in insurance industry, right? So people try to game the system. There's a cost associated to processing claims. So if it's below a certain amount, companies just pay out without questioning. So there are people and hackers who keep submitting a small $100, $200 claims just to get, dupe the insurance company. So every aspect of how an insurance industry works, right from selling a policy to underwriting a policy to the claims, it's all data. So data is kind of what the insurance industry should be breathing in the new digital era.
Those were interesting examples, Lipsa. Thank you. So coming back to you, Zoya, as a woman in your field, what has been the most significant barrier that you faced in your career?
Thanks, Kavya. There were many. I'll be quite honest with you. So if you can picture, Wall Street 10, 15 years ago, I mean, it's better now. But being a young woman on Wall Street and a regulator coming into these broker dealers, looking like a young woman, they would really dismiss you, right? They wouldn't take you for any authority that you had. So very frequently, I would be looked to take notes, right? So I'm the scribe or the note taker or the admin or go get the coffee kind of type of thing. So, so that is something that was real, that happened and maybe still happens and that occurs. I remember telling these broker dealers that you are violating rules, literally showing rules in a book. This is what you did wrong. This is what you didn't tell the client. This is what you did tell the client, which you shouldn't have. And this is how you violated money laundering rules. And they would just kind of like brush it off. Like, oh, you don't look like a FINRA examiner, or you don't look like a regulator, or, you really belong on this and this and this, that type of stuff continued very frequently. If you can imagine trading floors, you've all seen the movies, typically very male dominated, yelling and screaming, a lot of foul language, and you walk in there, you're looking like a woman, and, it's just a whole completely different treatment. And I guess I'd say, to sum it up, the biggest barrier is not being taken seriously, because Wall Street historically has been male dominated. So coming in looking like a young woman does not kind of fit the narrative. So it took a few years to figure out how to navigate it and not to let that continuous sort of dismissal affect me and my desire to continue to make a career on Wall Street.
Yeah, I'm sure most of us here might have experienced such kind of bias somewhere or the other. So Lipsa, have you had such experiences?
Yeah, I echo Zoya's, thoughts there. Just recently, I walked into a meeting, and it's not the first time. It's kind of a habit now that I'm the only woman in that room. Everybody else, we have a working session. Somebody gets up on the whiteboard to write and just looks straight at me like, you're going to take notes, right? It's just in his eyes, right? Like, I'm going to take notes. And I'm like, what about me tells you that I'm going to take notes? It's just my gender. Like, you decided looking at me that she should be taking notes. Like, seriously, working in insurance, working in IT, being the only woman, you have to like be confident and just sit there and speak up. Like, no, I'm not here to take notes. I have value to add, and maybe more than what you think I can add. So yes, it's just something you live by every day and just learn to work around it. It's sad that it's still happening, but it's true.
Yep. And I feel these days women are also starting to speak up and trying to break the bias. And that's what is the whole month about, breaking the bias. So things are changing, hopefully. So coming back to you, Liz, can you give me an example scenario where the lack of data literacy negatively impacted a project?
Yeah, so many examples come to mind, but one that particularly sticks out to me is around a client that I'd been working with for a couple of years, had reorged a couple of times, and we were kind of over the hump of the most recent reorganization, and the finance leadership, the HR leadership, the executive team, they wanted to do an enterprise efficiency strategy. And so, as you can imagine, very sensitive data, personnel impacts, not taken lightly at all. And so we started with a spans and layers analysis of the organization, understanding the layers of management, the spans of control, if that was productive in one business unit and not productive in another business unit, to try to figure out a strategy to address some of the efficiency opportunities in the organization in light of the reorg. And so dug into the data, have gotten very dangerous with pivot tables at this point. So I'm locked and loaded, I'm in there, and I'm noticing that the totals aren't really adding up. And so because I'd been around this client for a while, understanding about how many people should be in each business unit, the headcount across the organization, and it just was not adding up. So went back to some of the HR data team and was really just asking questions, where is this coming from? What's our source of truth? How is this data being processed? And it turned out that there was no single source of truth for the HR and personnel data. It varied by country, it varied by business unit. It kind of had a lag where there was attrition and people weren't being removed from the system for months and months. And so we're like, well, this is why the costs look really inflated in certain areas. And so we really had to take a step back, and we ended up losing some time on the project. It took about a week or two to cleanse the data and make sure that the data integrity was there. But it was such an integral part of the process because we knew that this had large scale impacts for people's livelihood at the end of the day, and decision-making around personnel changes, reductions in force, offshoring some roles to make sure that the business was as productive as possible and generating revenue, but that the expense efficiency was in line with where we needed it to be for reporting out to the street and the regulators, as well as the investors. So at the end of the day, it took some time to do, but in the long run, it made the project better, made us more efficient. And really, we were able to say, okay, we realized that our data now has integrity, we can manage it going forward, and kind of reworking that strategy. And then some systems work to make sure that we had one cohesive system to manage that data going forward.
Yep, that sounds great. And absolutely, like clean data is the most important thing when it comes to data projects. So that's completely
For sure.
true. So Amanda, do you have an example?
Oh
Such
yeah,
an example.
there are lots like Liz. We have lots, but that data integrity is so important, and that was kind of what happened in an organization I was supporting. Me and my team, we were asked to help support websites and bring them in compliance, and so in particular with GDPR as well as security and brand awareness. So they asked us to pull the number of websites. Seems like a very straightforward request, but unfortunately, these data points, I mean, the number of websites kept changing. We would have websites we stood up, we were taking them down, and then on top of that, what is a website? I mean, there are lots of different types of websites. There are applications, there are just flat websites, there are SaaS solutions, you know, a third-party solution that we put our URL on. So there's a lot of varieties. And so we would try to nail down what the criteria was, and we would give them the number, but then it kept changing because they would say, oh no, that is a website, or no, that's not a website. And then the leadership was just really confused, and they didn't have the time to really dive into the numbers. And so therefore they never really understood why the numbers kept changing. And so, you know, at the end of the day, they just weren't asking the right questions, and they weren't spending enough time to really dive into the numbers. So unfortunately, what ended up happening is they turned their sights onto the wrong aspect and put a financial, they invested in the wrong problem. They weren't really looking at the root cause of the problem. So, you know, it's definitely a case of they just did not understand the nuances of all the data, the context for the data. And going back to what Liz said, the story is so important, and understanding the story of what the data is, why it's important, and going into the details to understanding it.
That's true. Thank you, Amanda. Marci, would you have an example, such an example?
Yeah, I'm actually going to build off of what Liz and Amanda just talked about. And for the audience, we did kind of prepare how we were going to answer these questions, and I'm going to go off script now because I think there's something really interesting that has come up listening to the examples, and it's really thinking about data as numbers. And there's this whole element of the data source, and is the data clean, and you know, what's the single source of truth? And what I've seen the fail point in a lot of these projects being is purely the focus on that piece of data. There's this other encompassing piece of data, which is the human dynamic. Like, what data do you have around the behaviors of the people that are influencing the data? And I'll give you an example, like coming in to do a master data management project. And there was very clear data that the data was garbage for the most part. Like, there was many data sources, there were shadow applications bringing in other data. There wasn't consistent taxonomy, there wasn't consistency on how customers would be entered into multiple databases. And so that was a really easy thing to look at, like, here's the inconsistency in the data. Here's how we need to scrub the data, get a clean data set. Here's how we're going to put it into a single application. But that only goes as far as the humans that are doing the work around the data. So our data project really became gathering data on the behaviors of all of the people that were responsible to enter the data. So we had a sales team that had to enter new customer data. Now, they held off entering their data until a certain point because they wanted to do it all in a batch, and they wanted it to hit at the end of the month so that their numbers looked better. So they were playing their own data game. There was another team, the marketing team, wanted data entered a certain way because it showed up better for their stats and for their commission. So we basically went around and did analysis and gathered data on how people use data. And then looked at how do you create a whole new work stream, and really redesigned the behaviors, and had to go into like behavioral analysis and study to retrain people to get good data. And what I didn't start with by telling this story is we looked at this. Two other consulting firms had come in to do this project before, and they had both failed. They'd identified the things with the actual systems of the multiple systems and the way some of the data integrity was not clean. And they went in and they made recommendations and they implemented some things, but none of the changes fixed the problem because nobody stopped to look at, was there another data source? And the other data source was the human behavior data. And we literally did studies and tracked all of the data about what were the motivators, and had to look at compensation, rewards, and a whole bunch of other systems to be able to get clean customer data. And it was just one of those where we think like, this is purely a data project and the only data is in this one spot. And we were blind. The predecessors to this work were blind to other data that they needed to be looking at, which was the data around the humans. And so that was a really interesting story to go back and tell, and that we successfully landed that work. And to this day, and this was 3.5 years ago, the client still uses the things that we implemented, and they have a good data source now.
That's great. Thank you, Marci. So as a last question, I would like to ask each of the panelists for their input. So what advice would you give to the next generation of female leaders? Let's start with you, Liz.
Yeah, sure. That's a great question. And I think always a fun one to reflect on as we're putting a bow on conversations. So mine is really twofold. I always tell people going into anything new, be a sponge. You don't know what you don't know. Always be learning, be open to learning about new things, even if your lane is very clear cut, straight and narrow. Learn about different things, be curious. And also on the flip side of that, be confident in what you do know. So you're in this place where you're learning new things, but you also are where you are for a reason. You have a knowledge set that's valuable. I think as women, we often will go into rooms largely male dominated, and there'll be a consensus. And sometimes your opinion goes against that consensus. There are different factors that just from your diverse, unique background and lens you see and think about that somebody else might not think about. And those are valuable. So to be confident in that voice that you have, and that it's helping to add value to solutioning and strategizing, and that you're where you are because you're meant to be there.
Thank you, Liz. Amanda, what would your tip be, advice be?
Yeah, sit at the table. You know, so many times I've gone into a room with other women, and they actually either sit at the far end of the table or almost away from the table. There's chairs away from the table, and they're actually creating their own glass ceiling. So sitting at the table and making sure you have a voice. And if you don't have a voice, get an ally to help you, because we sometimes limit ourselves. So I think that's one of the things that is really recognizing how you might be limiting yourself, and then challenge yourself to be a little bit uncomfortable and sit at the table.
Right. That was great advice, Amanda. Thanks. Zoya, what are your thoughts?
Thanks, Kavya. So I'll echo what Liz and Amanda were saying. Add to that by saying that, of course, don't limit yourself. Have a voice, speak up, learn, and add that you think about sending that elevator down, right? So the concept of helping others, whatever level you're at, whatever stage you're at in your career and in your life, you have something to offer to someone else, right? As you're growing, help others grow with you. I've always been a believer in that. And even just being straight out of undergrad, there were folks that were at my school that I could mentor. There were high school kids that I could mentor, right? So there's a saying, and I'm probably going to butcher it, rising tide lifts all ships or boats or something along those lines. You may have heard it. So basically we all go up together, right? So there's something to be said for that. And that, sometimes there's this concept of, competition and being competitive, and it's, I have to work harder than the next person or whatever the case is. I've always competed with myself and myself only. And I believe that we can all grow together. So send that elevator down. As you're climbing the floors of your career, you may be in the lobby now, you'll be on a second level tomorrow. And as you go up, send that elevator back down, and it comes back to you.
Thank you, Zoya. Lipsa, what advice do you have?
All those are great advices. What I want to add is a different angle to this. Is when I was growing and learning, somebody even said, strategy without numbers is poetry. So as you are learning and, you are going to be summarizing and reflecting back and presenting to senior leadership, focus on data, make sure everything that you put together has a data that, that backs up what you're saying. And that will help you give you that leap that you need to move forward and substantiate everything you're saying and make it stronger. So definitely data literacy is key to your success.
That's great. Thank you. Marci, how would you like to close this?
I would just say, don't be afraid to ask for help. As women, we power through, and you've heard little bits of all of our stories, and that whole idea about being curious, absolutely. Like Liz said, be a sponge, and Zoya about sending the elevator down, which I love that statement. But we often don't give ourselves the same grace that we give others. And so we are afraid to ask for help, and we can see it as a sign of weakness, but it's really a sign of strength. And when you model behavior as a leader, whatever you're leading, if you are, just coming out of school, like you're still a leader of yourself, and there's still others that you can be mentoring. But when you ask for help and you show strength and the ability to ask for help, you encourage others to ask for help. And it creates this inclusive environment where it's okay to not have all the answers, because none of us do. And then you can join in together to help each other. And then it is back to lifting each other up. So that's somebody told me that very early in my career. It was very hard to learn still to be able to ask for help, but it's really been a benefit to myself. And I think to the people that I asked to help me, because they also learned along the way. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you everyone for sharing such valuable advices. I would surely put them to use. I'm sure the audience also found this session very enjoyable. So we have, I think, a couple of minutes for the audience Q&A. From the audience, if anyone has a question, please raise your hands, and Liz or Zoya would point at you and you'll get the mic.
Yeah, right here.
There's a mic right there.
Behind you.
Hi, my name's Catherine. I'm from Red Ventures. I was curious in terms of people analytics, what kind of data is available now given the work from home? So, today I saw this Zoom meeting is now being recorded. We have so much more chat data. Like, do you see any opportunities for more data to be used?
Thank you. Who would like to answer that?
I'm happy to take a stab at it, and then Lipsa, if you want to join in too. From that people side, some of those people analytics, the comment about chat, you can actually have chat scanned for keywords. You can get sentiment. You can look at volume of emails without the context of what the emails are. There's data around when people are applying for jobs, like there's a different type of traffic in their email. There's probably 100 different things that we can look at. And we actually have a bit of a better data set with people working from home because things are electronic. So there are different things that we can look at around sentiment, for sure, that you can track how your employee base is doing. In addition to some of the earlier things I mentioned, like absenteeism, attrition, just general feedback too. Lipsa, you want to add something to that?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I've started seeing reports in terms of how the productivity has changed in the light of the pandemic in the last 2 years. To give my own example, my dad, who's 78 years of age, he used to drive everywhere, whether it's paying a bill or something. In the last 2 years, he does everything online. So now he leaves a footprint in terms of, paying bills, just looking up, buying basic grocery to everything. So that data is available online. It's easier to pull a report and see how things are changing. I don't know what the baseline is, but I've started seeing the analytics really pulling stuff in terms of where this is taking us in terms of how we work, what the productivity is of people, and so on.
Yeah, thank you, Lipsa and Marci. Do we have any other questions from the audience?
I was just going to add, when you're online, there is so much data that is being collected about each of us, about where you came from, what website you came from, and what website you are going to, how long you're on that website, what you're doing on that website. There's just a lot of data that is being collected. Primarily, there are some big players, in particular Google Analytics and Tag Manager, but even like there's a tool called Mouseflow that tracks how you use your mouse. So there's just an enormous amount of data out there to uncover about what people are doing and why. at least we try to guess why.
I think one other thing that's captured as we're working from home, I know I've seen it myself and a lot on a lot of my teams that I've worked with being remote for the past 2 years, is we can now see analytics and insights on how much time we're spending in meetings a week. And I'm sure everyone in here can echo that you feel like working from home, you're in more meetings, you're spending more time doing the follow-ups from those meetings. So it, for our teams, has started to make us question, like, are we meeting for the sake of meeting? Are these productive? Where can we consolidate to be more efficient across the teams? So I think it's been helpful with everybody kind of siloed to their house to see how that has changed and shifted and how we can be more efficient with our time as teams.
Definitely looking for meetings that could have been just emails and not spend hours on the meeting. If you don't have, excuse me, if you don't have any other question from the audience, we actually have a question on the app. Shall I go ahead with that?
I thought I saw another hand back here,
Okay.
but I might have, maybe not. Go ahead, Kavya.
Okay, yeah. So the question we have is from Sakshi Gupta, and she asks, some of the non-profit organizations collect data in a disorderly manner. How can we create data literacy for those organizations so that they can be benefited?
So
non-profit organizations.
Yeah.
Yes.
So that's a great question, because often they don't tap into some of the skills in the private sector and industry. So I think one is having more data scientists out there and more of a focus. And as we move further into the digital age, really helping nonprofits understand the value and importance of data literacy and data analytics and what it can really bring to them. So I think it's a lot with all of you in entering into and helping nonprofits understand the value of that data.
Yep, that is great. Thank you, everyone. Do we have any more questions? If not, we are done for today. All right, I think that is it for today. I hope everyone had a great time. Please do check out our booth outside the halls there. We have our representatives there to answer all your questions. And I think you have some goodies as well, which you can take from there.
Thank you for having us, and we'll have some virtual goodies.
Yeah. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day. Bye.
Thank you.